Yo, this is Bench Gamer here. So in this video, I want to talk a bit about Honkai Impact Third's fandom and its relationship with both Genshin Impact's fandom and Honkai Star Rail's fandom, and how it has kind of evolved from this competition between Honkai Impact Third and Genshin into this kind of weird love-hate relationship between Honkai Impact Third's fandom and Honkai Star Rail's fandom. So let's just go back to the beginning, right? What is Honkai Impact Third? Honkai Impact Third was the game that HoYoverse created before Genshin Impact. And after Genshin Impact, a lot of new players came into the HoYoverse fandom, and a lot of them were basically just Genshin players, right? A lot of us didn't realize what Honkai Impact Third was, and didn't have any idea what HoYoverse, at the time called MiHoYo, was doing prior to that point. And at some point, whether through like osmosis of just HoYoverse content or because we actively searched for it ourselves, we realized that there was an Honkai Impact Third fan base and game somewhere out there. This is actually something I've heard other people who eventually became Honkai Impact Third fans. Like they started playing Genshin and they wanted more Genshin stuff, but not exactly like Genshin because they had already finished Genshin. So they started playing Honkai Impact Third, and that was how they became Honkai Impact Third fans. But I think that is definitely in the minority, and there was definitely already an existing Honkai Impact Third fan base prior to Genshin Impact. But the problem was that after Genshin Impact came out, HoYoverse sort of blew up on the international scene, right? Because up until that point, it was basically just a mobile games company in China, and it was popular in China and Japan and maybe Southeast Asia. But over in the West, nobody really knew what HoYoverse was. So even in those countries, right, Genshin is much bigger than Honkai Impact Third now. So after Genshin Impact came out, most of the people who were playing HoYoverse games were Genshin players. And I think that kind of created this weird toxic environment where Honkai Impact Third players and Genshin players were kind of just at each other's throat for a little bit. Even though like I feel like that is still in the minority of interactions because I see a lot of content creators who just play both Honkai Impact Third, Honkai Star, and Genshin all at the same time. And they get on fine. That's basically just me. I play Honkai Impact Third sometimes, not as much as Genshin, not as much as Honkai Star, but I do like the gameplay to an extent. I think the first part is just like the old stuff is it's pretty janky, but I can see why people like the game. So for me personally, I've never really had those interactions, but I do see it on Twitter. I do see it on Reddit. There will be these weird times when like Honkai Impact Third fans are just saying like Honkai Impact Third is better than Genshin, and Genshin fans are saying Genshin is better than Honkai Impact Third. I made a video a couple of months ago before Fontaine's story finished where I was saying that Skirk kind of heralded this end of the first part of Genshin Impact story, and that it was going to introduce us to another higher order of like cosmology that was part of the HoYoverse of games, like that tied together Honkai Star Rail, Genshin, and Honkai Impact Third all together into like this one giant multiverse of HoYoverse content. And I wasn't really wrong. I said at the time that I was pretty positive about this direction, and there were a couple of mixed comments. Most people were pretty positive on the idea of the multiverse of HoYoverse games, but there were comments that said, I don't want this Honkai Impact Third stuff in Genshin. I don't want this Honkai, sci-fi stuff in my Teyvat oriented game. And that is pretty indicative of most interactions that I've seen that were negative. It usually revolves around the fact that somebody is saying that Honkai Impact Third is better and that, Genshin could probably improve itself by being more like Honkai Impact Third, or Genshin fans not really getting it, really getting Honkai Impact Third, and not really even trying the game. And frankly, even if they do try the game, there is probably a high degree of fall off because, like let's just be honest, the Honkai Impact Third feels like a game that came out back in the days when HoYoverse was much less technically impressive. The UI is not as good. It feels very much like a mobile game UI. It feels like a game that was made back in like the 2015s for phones that were not as technically impressive as it is now, and that can play games like Genshin Impact. Although you still need a very good phone to play Genshin, but you know what I mean, right? Honkai Impact Third definitely feels like an older game, and because of that, most people are not. I wouldn't say most people, but a lot of people who got onto the HoYoverse content stuff are not going to enjoy Honkai Impact Third as much. And there's also the fact that Honkai Impact Third only has female characters, and that was one of the reasons why I was not as incentivized to play Honkai Impact Third at that time. And now I'm playing it for the reasons why I mentioned. There is like this whole multiverse of lore, and I am interested in interacting with Honkai Impact Third in that way, even though I might not like the gameplay as much as Genshin or Honkai Star Rail. But this weird interaction between the two fandoms, I think, has evolved over time into another weird interaction between the Honkai Impact third fandom and the Honkai Star Rail fandom, which is that I have noticed that there are some Impact third players who are getting into Star Rail mostly for the Honkai stuff and not really getting that content. Honkai Star Rail so far does not have outside of the exported characters, or the variants, whatever you want to call them, the characters that look like Honkai Impact third characters. Besides those things, there is not really that much tying the Honkai Star Rail universe and Honkai Impact third so far, besides Welt and all of the XPs. So I can see that there are some Honkai Impact thirds going to into Star Rail that were a bit disappointed by that. There's also the fact that Honkai Star Rail is now just objectively more popular than Honkai Impact Third. So whenever you go online and go to a search engine and type in Honkai, you're going to be more likely to you're more likely to find Honkai Star Rail content than Honkai Impact Third. And I think that also pisses off some Honkai Impact Third players who, want just Honkai Impact Third content, but you have this other game now that also shares the Honkai moniker, overshadowing Honkai Impact Third, even though that's really the game you care about. Whether that's because you don't like turn-based games or you don't like the new story that Honkai Star Rail has, who knows, right? But I do see this sentiment sometimes. And then there comes a character like Acheron that is just full of Honkai Impact Third references, and then you will see these tweets and comments saying, I don't really get Acheron. I don't really get what she's trying to represent. She seems like a bit of a boring character because, well, she's just full of Honkai Impact Third references that I don't get. And then on the other side of things, you'll have Honkai Impact third players who are getting more excited because Acheron is catering to them and that she is representing all these Honkai Impact third influences on Honkai Star Rail. It feels like the abrasive relationship that Genshin had with Honkai Impact third has actually moved over to this other weird love-hate relationship between Impact third players and Honkai Star. And I just find that kind of funny because for me, it does feel like there are some players for Honkai Star Rail that are coming over from the Honkai Impact Third fandom, and they're only interested in it for the Impact Third influences. So they're like, oh, where is Fu Hua? Where is Kiana? I really want these characters in this game, and I totally understand that. But sometimes it feels like it goes overboard. Like I often see these comments and threads about how Welt is supposed to be this super powerful character, and that why doesn't he do anything? Why didn't he do anything against Fantilia? Why wasn't he like one-shotting Aventurine? And I'm sure there are a lot of lore reasons for why he's not. Like he might not be as powerful. He's really old. He's being powered down. Whatever the reason, lore reason, I'm sure there is a lore reason for why he doesn't do all these things. But the reality is that he doesn't do these things because this is a new game. And if he did all of that, if he made it so that we didn't really have to try to defeat any of the bosses, then that would completely negate the idea that we're the protagonists of this game. This game would no longer be like Honkai Star Rail, it would be Honkai Welt Rail, where Welt just commanded the Astral Express and went all over the place to one-shot enemies, while the main characters really don't do anything. I guess you could also count Welt as one of the main characters, but when I say main characters, what I mean is the main character, Dan Hun, and March 7th, of course. So these three characters, in my opinion, are really like the center of the new cast of characters in Honkai Star Rail compared to Honkai Impact third characters. So you'll often find these very enthusiastic comments and requests for the Honkai Star Rail story that really don't make a lot of sense in the context of a new game. And even though I do think that it's really interesting how Honkai Star Rail ties into Impact Third's lore, I do think that Honkai Impact, the way that they put Honkai Impact Third content into Star Rail is for the most part right now references. I do think that when or if they do introduce the Honkai to Star Rail, it won't be called a Honkai. Honkai in Chinese and Japanese just means like collapse. So even if they don't have Honkai, I think there is an argument to say that even if they don't have the actual Honkai like phenomenon in Honkai Star Rail, it would still make sense because Honkai in just like those two languages just means a very general sense of things collapsing. It's kind of like this edgelordy word. So in a general sense, it would still be able to describe what is going on in Honkai Star Rail, where you have all these Stellarons cutting off the connections from all these different worlds, and we're trying to write that and get rid of the Stellarons. So that's like we're fighting against the Honkai in a general sense, as in Like it's something that's happening all across the world. But I do think that there is a chance that they will introduce the Honkai to the Star Rail world. It's just that I don't think they will be called Honkai. I think they will be called whatever the local version of it is called in, whatever world we go to. Like from what I have read, and from what I've seen from lore videos, Acheron's world was affected by the Honkai or their version of the Honkai, but it's just not called the Honkai. So I'm not against any of this. I think this is all very cool. Me personally, I like the idea of things having like an entire world of lore before I even step on the world essentially. So I'm not against this, but I do think I understand more of the other side of this argument now. The side that is saying I don't want this Honkai Impact third stuff in Honkai Star Rail. I don't want this lore that I don't really care about and is required to understand the characters. Even though I do think that Acheron, I think Acheron has been built up enough in Penacony that she doesn't really require you to understand the Honkai Impact third lore. Like I see some comments, sometimes people will say, well, why does it matter her name is Raiden Bosen Mori May? To which I would answer that as I understood it, because she represents like this contamination by nihility. So she's not supposed to, she's battling against losing her own self. So the fact that she says her name is what is important, not what her name actually is. It's the act of actually saying her name that is representative of her fighting against nihility. So that is how I understood it as someone who did not intimately know the character and story of Honkai Impact Third. So it still had an impact on me. But I do see like the argument that if you don't care about Raiden Mei, if you don't care about the content outside of Honkai Star Rail, it could seem a bit random. Like she's just saying her name. What the fuck? Why does that matter? So I do see that side of thing. And frankly, I don't think that the way that Genshin Impact introduced this larger cosmological world at the end of Fontaine, where Skirk essentially just acted as a narrative device to introduce us to all of these higher order beings like the Foul or Gold or whoever, it feels a bit like ham-fisted. It feels like they're very much rushing towards that plot line. Whereas I think a lot of people prefer that Genshin Impact stay in Teyvat. I've heard a few content creators say that it would be kind of weird that we just go to another planet or another continent other than Teyvat, even though I do think that is essentially what is going to happen at some point, because we know from the interview that Xiaolohao had at Fudan University that we are only one third of a way through Genshin Impact's story, and there's only two nations left in Teyvat, so the only place we can go after Teyvat is other places other than Teyvat. And I'm not sure how people are going to feel about that. So that is one trepidation. That is something I am kind of hesitant about the future of Genshin. I don't know how people are going to react to that. But back to the topic about Honkai Star Rail. Yeah, I because of my experience at the end of Fontaine, where I was a bit weirded out by Skirk not being the focal point of the reveal. Instead, she was the person who revealed the reveal, and we didn't even get to see the reveal, which was essentially the fact that the Foul treated the giant whale as a pet, and the whale was supposed to be able to destroy Teyvat. So it's like, wow, we're really on another plane of power levels now, huh? And I because of that, I can understand more now why people don't want this extra Honkai Impact third lore that is like on another plane of power level and on another plane of like cosmological interconnectedness in their Honkai Star Rail game. And I just find that really interesting. I'm really interested in where all of this goes and whether or not they will actually introduce the Honkai as a phenomenon to Star Rail. I think they will at some point, and that's because Void Archives is still in Star Rail, right? So he is literally in the Star Rail universe. So what is he doing if he's not on the Astro Express? I believe there was some line somewhere where Pom Pom said that like Void Archives was like kind of a horrible person and raised a lot of trouble on the Astro Express, and that's why he's not on it anymore. So I don't know what's going to happen with that. And yeah, that's basically my thoughts on this weird love-hate relationship between Honkai Impact Third's fandom and Star Rail, where one side is getting super excited about all these Honkai Impact Third references and basically just it feels like they're dogs kind of like scrambling for all of the references, all the scraps of references that HoYoverse is throwing out in Star Rail so far. I don't think any of this is really detracting from my experience. I don't think all of these Honkai Impact Third references are bad. Like the fact that I played through the first 9 chapters of Honkai Impact Third and I saw Cocolia in another form, and I could actually compare the differences in how Cocolia was portrayed in both games. I find that really interesting. But I definitely feel like I can empathize more with the people who don't want that stuff in the game anymore. Because if you're not going to play and consume content outside of Honkai Star Rail, like what does it really matter to you if you have all these references and people are talking about all this stuff you don't understand? So it's basically kind of a non-opinion once again that I'm having. But what can you do when you don't have a dog in this fight? Anyways, this is Bench Gamer signing out. I will see you guys sometimes. Bye bye.